He was hired to bury the woman found in the river. But she blinked. The first time Silas saw her, she was more water than woman, drifting slow beneath the willow bend, hair tangled like riverweed, a single pale hand turned upward to the sky. The call came at dawn, same as always when bad news rode fast. A body had washed up near the old crossing bridge, and the sheriff didn't want it seen by townsfolk. Silas didn't ask questions. He never did. Shovel strapped to his mule, he rode out through fog and frost, boots crunching where frost met earth, and silence ran thicker than blood. The current had cradled her like a secret, laying her down at the edge of the bank where a small cluster of birch trees swayed like mourners. He stood over her for a long minute, brow furrowed, coat collar pulled high against the chill, and then knelt with the quiet resignation of a man who's buried too many strangers to count. Her dress was torn in 3 places. Mud streaked her neck. But there was something in her brow that hadn't quite settled into the slackness of death. He reached for her wrist, expecting cold and stillness. It was cold, but not still. It twitched. He froze. Her eyelids fluttered once, then again. The whisper of a breath rattled from her chest, faint as wind across snow. "No," Silas whispered, reeling back. The breath again, real, alive, painful. She was not dead. Every rule, every contract, every sheriff's order shattered in that moment like ice beneath a boot. The law had sent him to bury her, but now the river had returned her, and she blinked. Slowly, with shaking hands, Silas lifted her from the bank. Muddy water soaking into his coat, her head lolled against his chest as if trusting him with a secret. Somewhere behind him, hoofbeats echoed faintly. Somebody else coming. But he didn't wait to see who. "You're not done yet," he murmured, mostly to himself. "Not if you blink." With strength born of instinct, he threw her over the mule and covered her with his own coat, eyes sharp and breath caught. Then he turned from the river, from the contract, from the law, and rode into the trees where no one could follow. The shovel stayed behind, forgotten beside the hole he never dug. Silas had buried 17 people in his life, and not a single one had come back. Not until her. The ride back to his cabin was longer than it should have been. But he took the side trails, the dry creek beds, the paths where hooves left no print. His mule, stubborn but loyal, carried the weight without question, and the woman beneath his coat never stirred again. By the time they reached the edge of his land, the sun had crested low in gold over the pines, and Silas had already started talking to her like she could hear. He didn't say much, just the names of the birds, the smell of rain coming, the things dead men don't notice. His cabin stood quiet and crooked against the trees, built with rough logs and grief, a place meant to keep the world out and nothing in. Inside, it was warm but bare. A stove, a cot, a table, and a rifle above the door. He laid her down on his cot like setting firewood with care, stripped off the soaked cloth from her wrist, and saw the bruise shaped like a boot. Something in his jaw clenched. He poured water, cleaned her wounds, and stitched what he could. She didn't speak, not even when the fire cracked loud. Just once, her hand flinched when he touched her ribs. He backed off after that, gave her space, though the cabin barely had any to offer. That night, he didn't sleep, sat at the table with his coat still wet, boots still on, and stared at the flicker of the lamp dancing on her face. She was too thin, cheekbones too sharp, and yet she was alive. That fact kept looping in his mind like a campfire story told wrong. He was paid to bury a corpse, not to nurse a half-dead girl with wounds that looked made by men. Not the river. In town, folks called him Grave Hand, never asked his past, and he never gave it. Hollow man with hollow work. But now he'd broken his first contract in years, and there was a woman breathing in his bed. Somewhere outside, the wind shifted. He stood, walked to the door, and listened. Nothing but trees. Still, he bolted the latch slow, quiet, then turned back to her with a whisper. "Who did this to you?" Her mouth didn't move. But under her eyelids, her eyes rolled like she was dreaming of things that didn't end in water. She woke with a gasp that cracked the silence like gunfire. One moment, the cabin was still but for the ticking stove and the steady rhythm of Silas pacing slow near the window. The next, she was upright, eyes wide, breath ragged, clutching the thin wool blanket to her chest like it could keep out memory. Silas dropped the tin cup in his hand, startled by the sound more than the movement, but didn't move toward her. He just stood there, watching like a man trying not to spook a horse tangled in wire. Her eyes darted around the room, stone walls, firelight, antlers on the rafter beam, then landed on him. Her lips parted, but no words came, only the raw sound of a throat unused. "You're safe," he said, voice low, hands open. "No one's here but me." She blinked again, slow this time, like the world was still settling into shape. Her jaw trembled, and one hand clutched her side where bruises purpled the skin just under her collarbone. "You pulled me out," she rasped. He nodded once. "You blinked." She gave a broken laugh that turned into a cough. Wasn't supposed to. He knelt, not close, just enough for his voice to land steady. "What's your name?" She hesitated too long. "Don't remember," she whispered. Then, almost bitterly, "Not the one they called me, anyhow." Silas said nothing, just stood and poured her more water. When he held the tin cup out, she didn't take it. "You gonna sell me?" she asked. His face didn't move. "No. Everyone sells me," she said, voice cracking but cold. "One way or another." Silas set the cup beside her and walked to the fire, poking it for something to do. "Not this time," he said. "Not while you're under this roof." She watched him like a coyote, unsure if the trap's been disarmed. He didn't ask more questions. She didn't give more answers. But when she drank, he saw the way her hands shook, not just from weakness, but from something deeper, as if survival itself was a threat. That night, she didn't sleep. Neither did he. But just before dawn, her voice drifted through the darkness. "You weren't supposed to see me." Silas didn't turn, just whispered back, "Maybe that's why I did." By the third morning, she could stand without falling. Barefoot on the creaky wood, wrapped in one of Silas's oversized shirts, she moved like a shadow, testing its own form. She didn't speak much, and neither did he, but they found a rhythm between silences. She cooked eggs with too much salt, folded his blanket the wrong way, refilled the woodpile without asking. He never corrected her. He just let her live, like she hadn't been pulled from death's mouth days before. When she stepped outside for the first time, the sky was wide and pale, wind tugging at her hair and the cold bit her bare toes. Silas watched from the porch, leaning against a post, his coffee steaming. "Ain't much out here," he said, voice like gravel. "That's why I came," she replied, gaze locked on the distant trees like they might remember her better than she did. Later, when she returned inside, she paused at the door. "You bury a lot of people?" He nodded once. "Most don't blink." She gave a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes and went back to tending the fire. That night, thunder rolled far off in the hills. She jolted awake, eyes wild, breath shallow. Silas, from his chair in the corner, didn't move. "Storm's far," he said. "Won't touch us." "They said that once," she muttered. He didn't ask who they were. Instead, he pulled the extra quilt from the shelf and laid it at the foot of her cot, a quiet offering. "Some storms ain't weather," he said, "but they pass just the same." She looked at him then, really looked, like seeing a man and not just the walls he'd built around himself. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Silas stared into the fire a long time before answering. "Because I buried someone once, and it was the wrong one." Her brow furrowed, but she didn't press. The fire snapped, the wind howled faintly through the eaves, and the cabin held them both in its silence. For the first time, she didn't flinch when he walked past. And when she fell asleep, her hands weren't balled into fists. She was stirring porridge when her sleeve slipped, and Silas saw the full pattern of bruises down her arm. Finger-shaped, uneven, some older than others. He didn't say a word, but something changed in his eyes, like a fuse lit in reverse. She noticed, pulled the sleeve down slow, and kept stirring. "They weren't always rough," she said quietly. "Not at first." Silas didn't answer. He just poured water into the basin like the sound might drown memory. She set the wooden spoon down. "You ever had folks stare at you like you're a mule gone lame?" "Once or twice." "They don't say much. Just that look. Like you ain't worth the feed you'd take to survive another day." Her voice was steady, but her eyes stayed locked on the fire. "They found me behind the depot. Said I was too pretty to be sleeping in dirt." That was the first lie. Silas stood at the door, hands resting on the frame. He didn't interrupt. She needed the silence to say it, and he'd learned silence could hold more weight than any word. "Took me to a ranch west of Carson's Hill. Big place, fancy floors. Said I'd help in the kitchen." She laughed then, sharp and bitter. "But they didn't want my cooking." She traced a finger along the rim of the bowl. "One of them said I belonged to him now. Another said the river would clean up what they broke." Her voice cracked, but she didn't cry. "So when they finished with me, they wrapped me in a feed sack and dropped me like trash." Silas turned away, jaw tight. His hand gripped the doorframe so hard the wood creaked. "But I didn't float," she said, almost smiling. "River caught me, but it didn't carry me far. Guess even water knows what's been thrown away too many times." He finally spoke, voice low and cold. "If I knew their names." She shook her head. "Don't need revenge. Just needed one place that didn't turn me out." Silas nodded. "You've got that now." Outside, the wind picked up, whispering through pine like it heard every word. Inside, her shoulders dropped for the first time, not from weakness, but from relief. And in that small kitchen, surrounded by scars and firelight, the air felt different, like the start of shelter that might finally hold. The knock came just after noon. 3 sharp raps, then a pause, then one more. Silas froze mid-step. The girl stiffened, fingers curling around the wooden ladle like it could shield her. "Don't move," Silas whispered, grabbing the rifle from above the door. She backed into the far corner, heart hammering, eyes already wide with old fear. Silas opened the door slow, barrel first. A man stood on the other side, clean boots, tan coat, hat low, and a red scarf tied bowled around his throat. "Evening, friend," the man drawled, like they were neighbors and this was just a polite check-in. "Got turned around up near the ridge. Thought I saw smoke. Was hoping to find shelter." Silas didn't lower the rifle. "Ain't got none to spare." The man smiled thin. That's so? His eyes flicked past Silas into the cabin, too quick to be casual. Travel alone? Always. Hmm. The stranger's eyes narrowed. Funny thing is, a couple boys down Carson Way said a grave man rode out last week to bury a girl from the river. Silas said nothing, but they heard he never came back with a filled hole. The man stepped closer. Now that's odd, isn't it? Silas didn't blink. Who are you to care? The man tapped the brim of his hat. Let's just say, I collect unpaid debts. A chair scraped behind Silas. He didn't turn, but he knew she was moving. Ain't no debts here, Silas said. Just me. Smokes from breakfast, and the grave's been filled. The man's eyes glittered. Well then, I suppose there's nothing left to see. But he didn't move, just stared. And in that stillness, the girl stepped forward. Only a little. Just enough to be seen behind Silas's shoulder. Her face was pale, but her chin lifted. The man's smile cracked. Ah, so the river does return its ghosts. Silas raised the rifle half an inch. Time to ride. She's marked, the man said. You know that, right? You keep her, and you inherit every hand that ever laid claim. Then let them come, Silas growled. The man tipped his hat, stepped back once, then again. Your grave friend. He turned and walked slow down the path, boots deliberate. Silas shut the door and bolted it. The girl leaned against the wall, breath shallow. That was him, she whispered. One of 'em. He won't be back alone, Silas muttered. And he was already loading rounds. They spent the night readying the land for war. Silas moved with silent purpose, digging shallow trenches along the tree line, setting makeshift alarms with scrap wire and tin, spreading broken glass beneath the windowsills. The girl, she still hadn't given her name, followed without question, carrying wood, tying knots, watching every move like she was memorizing the shape of survival. You sure they'll come? She asked once, voice low as dusk settled over the valley. A man like that don't bluff, Silas replied. He marks what he wants, and he don't like being told no. She didn't ask more. She just carried more stones, helped board up the back wall, and checked the lanterns. By midnight, the cabin glowed like a lighthouse for ghosts. They sat by the fire with rifles between them. You still thinking of running? He asked. She shook her head. I did enough of that. He glanced at her bruised knuckles. You ever shot before? She looked him straight in the eyes. I've pointed one, never pulled. Hope you won't have to, he muttered. The wind outside howled low, dragging pine needles across the roof like claws. In the distance, a coyote barked once, then fell silent. She tensed. How many do you think? Don't matter, Silas said. We hold till dawn. She nodded, then added, If I don't make it, you will. But if I don't, she pressed, bury me with a name I choose, not one they gave. Silas looked at her. What name? She took a breath. Clara. He nodded once. Then you're Clara, from now on. Hours crawled. Every creak of wood or rustle of wind made their hands twitch toward steel. But still, nothing. Until just before sunrise, when the first branch snapped outside, then another, then boots. At least 3 pairs, maybe more. Silas motioned her toward the crawl space. She shook her head. I'm staying. He didn't argue. Just passed her a loaded revolver. Only shoot if you have to. Aim for knees. Then he stepped toward the front door, rifle raised, boots steady. I buried 17, he muttered under his breath. Let's see how many stay down this time. And as the shadows moved outside like wolves, Clara reached for courage that didn't feel borrowed anymore. The first man came through the back window like a fox, silent and crouched low, boots landing on the kitchen floor without a whisper. Clara didn't scream. She'd already crouched behind the firewood stack, breath locked in her chest, hand tight on the revolver. She saw his outline in the pale light, thin, wiry, fast, and she waited. He turned toward the door, searching for Silas. That's when her finger tightened and the gun bucked in her hand. One shot. He dropped with a scream, clutching his leg. Then another crack from Silas's rifle at the front door cut through the cabin like thunder. That one didn't scream. It was chaos after that. The door exploded inward. One man, two, then a third behind them. And Silas met them in a roar of gunfire and fury. He didn't fight like a man defending a cabin. He fought like a man who'd already made peace with death. The first fell before clearing the doorway. The second got close enough to shove Silas against the wall, but Clara fired again from behind and caught him in the hip. Silas twisted free and drove his elbow into the man's throat. The third tried to run. Silas didn't let him. When it ended, the room stank of powder, blood, and pine. 3 men lay still. One groaned from the kitchen floor. Silas stepped over a body, blood dripping from a cut on his forehead. "You good?" he asked. Clara stood, hands trembling, face pale, eyes locked on the revolver like it might still bite. "He's not dead," she whispered. "That one." Silas walked to the man on the floor, bleeding from the knee, face twisted in agony. "Tell me who sent you," he said. "You know damn well," the man spat. "Red Scarf's not done with you." Silas crouched beside him, voice calm. "Tell him next time he sends dogs, he better come himself." He stood, rifle still hot, and looked at Clara. She was crying now, but not out of fear. "I shot someone," she whispered. "To live," he said. "Not to kill?" She nodded, though her hands shook worse. He stepped close, took the gun from her gently. "You blinked," he said, echoing her own words from days ago. "That means you chose to stay." Outside, the sky had begun to glow with pale orange. They hadn't slept. They hadn't run. But they were alive. And for the first time since she'd crawled from the river, Clara didn't feel like a ghost anymore. The bodies were buried by noon. 3 mounds on the edge of the property, no markers, just stones laid in silence. Clara watched as Silas dug, sweat dripping from his brow, shirt clinging to his back, movements steady and slow. He didn't speak the entire time, and neither did she. Some things weren't meant for words. After the last mound was covered, he leaned on the shovel and looked at her. "You don't owe me thanks," he said. "I didn't do it for you." "I know," Clara replied. "You did it 'cause you were tired of burying the wrong ones." That made him pause, then nod once. They walked back to the cabin together. Inside, the air still smelled faintly of gunpowder, but the fire had been rekindled and the window patched. Clara swept the floor while Silas replaced the broken latch. It felt like reclaiming something that had nearly been lost again. Later, she sat on the porch steps, a blanket over her shoulders, a mug of coffee cradled in her hands. Silas joined her after washing the dirt from his hands, his eyes scanning the horizon like he always did. "They'll send more," she said quietly. "Maybe not soon, but eventually." "Let 'em," he said. "We'll be ready." She looked down at the cup. "I'm not who I was when I came here." "Good," he said. "That girl was running. This one's standing." She smiled faintly. "Still don't know what comes next." "Most folks don't," he said. "But you got a place here if you want it." She turned to him. "I don't want to be taken in like some lost dog." Then don't be, he said. Stay like someone who chose to. She stared at him, then nodded once, firmly. All right, I'll stay. The wind shifted just then, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. For the first time in a long while, she breathed deep and didn't flinch. Clara Hart, she said, testing the name aloud. Sounds real enough. It is now, Silas said. And anyone who comes looking for the girl from Carson's Hill, they won't find her. She died in that river. Clara looked toward the distant line of trees. Let her stay dead. The sun rose a little higher, catching the cabin roof in gold. And for the first time, she let it touch her face. By spring, the scar on Clara's hand had faded, but the calluses on her palms told a new story. Of days spent splitting wood, tending goats, planting rows that would feed more than one. The cabin had changed too. Silas built a second room with her help, hammered each nail without a word. But when he stepped back and let her paint the door blue, it said more than any vow could. Folks started passing through, traders, neighbors, lost riders looking for the ridge trail. And they all noticed the same thing. A woman with eyes like old storms, and a man who stood beside her like the earth itself had asked him to stay still. One day, an old widow from a nearby homestead stopped by to trade herbs. She looked at Clara, tilted her head, and asked gently, "You kin?" Silas didn't answer. Clara did. "By choice," she said. "Not blood." The woman smiled wide. "That's the better kind." That summer, the red-scarfed man never returned. Maybe word had spread. Maybe the mountains swallowed him. Maybe men like that don't come back from a place where mercy digs deeper graves than vengeance ever could. Clara never asked. She was too busy learning how to shape bread with steady hands, how to read winter in the wind, how to laugh at nothing and mean it. On a quiet evening, sitting on the porch with the last lights spilling like honey across the yard, Silas turned to her. "Still staying?" She didn't look at him. Just sipped her tea and said, "I'm not the one who stayed. You are." He chuckled, low and warm. "You ever think about leaving?" "Not since I got here." She looked out at the hills, the fields, the line of sky she once thought was too far to ever reach. "You didn't save me, Silas," she said. "You gave me a place where I could save myself." He didn't reply, but he didn't need to. The porch creaked as he leaned back in his chair, boots up, the stars starting to blink overhead. Somewhere beyond the trees, wolves howled, but they sounded far away. Safe. Clara smiled, leaned her head on his shoulder, and let the quiet wrap around them like a prayer answered. The girl from the river was gone. In her place stood a woman who belonged to the earth, the fire, the name she chose. And the cabin? It wasn't just shelter now. It was home. If this story touched your heart, ride with us again. Like, share, and subscribe. And visit the channel for full cinematic long stories from Crimson West.